Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're in Derry, we're at Ruff Brothers Brewing. Come check it out. It's a small Brewiks 200 litre system, unpressurized fermenters, but I think it's fair to say that this is true handcrafted beer, made the hard way. So you can see Andy in the background there mashing out, and we followed his brew today, and we just want to tell you a little bit about his story, run through his beers, run through production here, so you can see what it's like to brew on a scale that's self-brewed, self-distributed, building and working relationships with your customers directly. So Andy does everything himself in-house, from production to marketing to sales and everything, and it works on a system this size, so check it out. So let's start by looking at the brewing system that Andy's using. Brewiks is an interesting system in that each vessel has a double use. So this is the mash tun and the kettle. It also has a unique counterflow chiller built into the walls. And over here is the loiter tun and the whirlpool. Andy's mashing out and removing the grain. Once that's complete, we'll take the plates out of the bottom of that, give it a nice rinse down, and then that'll become the whirlpool for following the boil. And then we pipe it up to run from the whirlpool back through the counterflow chiller, which is built into the wall. Now this is called a Brewiks 200, but it's possible to produce more than 200 litres of packaged beer finished. You'll know that Brewiks allows you to push the boundaries of what can be achieved. You can brew high gravity wort and liquor back in your whirlpool, or you can just push to hit those extra volumes. So instead of brewing 200 litres, you push it so that you're consistently hitting 250 litres of packaged beer. So today we're brewing an oatmeal stout, yeah?
Yes, oatmeal stout.
What percentage?
5.4.
5.4. You have brewed one batch yesterday?
Yes.
Sent it to the fermenter?
And it was pitched yesterday with the yeast.
Yeah.
And this is the second batch that's going in on top. Obviously being pitched yesterday gives the yeast a start on the wort that's already in there, so that when this goes in, she's well and truly on. So
you'll have picked up that Andy doesn't have a local Derry accent, so he emigrated here. Well, can you call emigration the right word? Covered this before when you hear me talking about Brewiks Microbrewery equipment, in the sense that it's exceptionally nimble, it's innovative, it's, you know, ultra premium quality. It's the kind of system that we talk about plug and brew. So whenever Andy worked with us and we set this up, I asked him to make sure there was a water supply and asked him to make sure there was a 3-phase plug. And that's it. We arrive, we put the kit together and can pretty much start brewing that day if we want. I guess for me, the key thing with a system at this size is that you have to be willing to put the graft in.
Yes.
So fair enough. It can be daunting when you look at investing in brewery equipment, and you can look at all the different options that there is out there, but what you want is something that consistently delivers. And if you're willing to work hard on a system this size, distribute your own beer, package your own beer in-house, you can make it work.
I know. Tell them the right angles makes better beer.
Yeah, so you may notice that there's a slight imperfection in this tank, and Andy will tell you that it's because right angles make better beer. But we can teach you how to brew, we can provide you with technical support, and we can explain all these things, but whenever you fill a fermenter with hot caustic and forget to open the valve or keep the lid off, what can happen is a vacuum can be created and it can damage the tank. Now, had it been one mistake, you would have probably fixed that mistake for Andy and said, look, these things happen. But when you do it on two separate occasions, you have to ask yourself, when are you going to listen? But all joking aside, we're going to get this fixed for him. Accidents happen, that's part of life. So he has non-pressurized conical fermenters from Brewiks. So we have 3 here with the cooling plate installed inside. You can see there's spray balls for cleaning, and then a cooling plate installed inside for regulating temperature with glycol control unit. Whenever we started working with Andy and we installed the brewery to start with, we installed the first 3 fermenters with the cooling plates inside. Then obviously he became busier and needed to expand, and we had the option then to add an extra couple of fermenters. So we added the fermenters, but on this occasion we added the cooling strip to the outside. So it means that it's just a little bit easier to work with, and we've modernised the way that we create the lids and create the seal on the top of those. So precisely temperature regulated, in the sense that there's solenoid valves at the pipes that go around the cooling strips, and then the digital control display. Yeah, I can't talk today. Yes, these are pharmaceutical grade tanks, in that the cooling stripes run all the way around and down into the cone. And we have the digital control display. We have the digital control display here. Temperature set, touch button, and then the solenoids will call for cooling as and when required to ensure that you hit a precise temperature required for fermentation. So you'll see the room here that Andy's built. So the room is built in the way that in the colder months, because this is an industrial outlet, he can close the doors here, and he has some heat tubes on that kick in to provide a much more ambient temperature, so that cold won't affect the tanks. Because these tanks came without insulation. Now we can add insulation, but we were very aware that we wanted to deliver this package within Andy's budget so that he wasn't stretching himself. And we feel that he's grown considerably since we installed the Brewiks brew system here, and given that he started as a home brewer using grain fallers and brewing multiple batches, he really truly has stepped up from one stage to the next, and has established himself now as a good local brand. He has deliberately just focused on the dairy area, and once he feels that he's confident in what he's been doing with the locals here, then he will start to expand into other areas. Obviously the temperature controlled room in here, you'll see boxes of the beer sitting, not labelled yet and open. This is bottle conditioning, so it's not counter pressure filled. It's probably more of a traditional method, in that there's a sugar solution added to the beer after fermentation is complete. It's bottled, then it's brought in here to allow secondary fermentation to take place, and in that secondary fermentation the beer's carbonating. So whilst we've just come back from lunch with Andy, we visited a local restaurant that he brews a beer for, 2 North. Now he does have his own core range of beers, but one of the unique things about his business model is that he would brew own brand labels for a lot of the local restaurants. Andy's core range will have a Irish Red Ale, Oatmeal Stout, which we're brewing today, a Northern Pale Ale, and then obviously his IPA. So 4 beer styles in his core range. And then he brews beers for restaurants, takeaways, and recently he's told me that he's been brewing a beer for a shop also. Very much putting the customer on the front of the label, but also identifying the fact that he is the brewer and that it's Ruff brothers that have made the beer. So one thing I want to show you is how handcrafted the beer really is here. So check this out. So the restaurant that we've just come back from, we enjoyed one of these beers in it, and the label are set up for these. So they're hand labeled one at a time. They're date stamp, where he's literally winding this and pushing down and date stamping each individual label. So there's I suppose there's an element of, you know, trying to think of authenticity with the name Handmade Beer. So Ruff Brothers Handmade Beer, that is an authentic name, and we want to try and get that message across. So we're going to go and have a chat with Andy, and he can tell you about the brewery himself. Like to introduce our viewers today to Andrew Ruff, or
Greetings.
Andy, whatever your preferred.
Don't mind. Alan.
Alan, yeah, whatever. We have known each other for a number of years, and probably from when you started homebrewing.
Yes, that's correct.
So you worked at Greenfeller and to within inches of its life,
yeah.
And added
it still survives. It needs a new pump though. So.
yeah. Added another setup before you started into the commercial venture. So, or I guess what the viewers would like to know is what made you want to get into beer?
I think I always came from a heavy drinking family, but we're interested in beer, and beer was a big part of North of England culture, which is where I'm from.
Yeah.
And we were always, you know, pubs were prolific in those days, and they always served a good selection of what traditional hand-pulled beers, which is this is a beer engineer. And this would be common sight in any of the pubs when I was drinking, you know, during the 80s and 90s. I think the emphasis on, and the difference with Ireland is that England has a lot of independent breweries who solely deal with what we call cask. Yeah. And this is shall we say, a different style of beer. The beer is much more natural, it's not pasteurised, it's still a live product when it's served behind the bar. Yeah. And that's what most English beer drinkers are familiar with. Those beers are very carefully crafted and of very good quality and very subtle flavours. And I think for me it was a merge of, being here based in Derry, a merge of this new age of beer brewing, which is the craft scene, I suppose you would call it, where people are experimenting and making beers more hoppy and different flavours and so forth. But not losing sight of the way that beers were traditionally made. Where the emphasis was on, you know, quality ingredients, quality in, quality out, handcrafted beers, and I really that was my angle, I guess. I just wanted to focus on traditional beer styles, but make them a little bit more exciting, but handcraft them and make them of good quality. Because I think at the end of the day, it's interesting to taste different styles of beers, but I think most people will always go back to a good quality standard style of beer, which offers them more than the microbrewery offering.
I guess, you know, a question that I get asked all the time when someone comes to me and they say we're wanting to start a brewery, will you help us? And like I own my own brewery, we've run selling brewing ingredients and equipment since 2013. We really think we've got our finger on the pulse, but I would always be very wary of somebody asking for a system of this size, in that I'm aware of how much hard work it is, because I had that system myself at one stage. And I guess what I'd like you to do is tell people about that experience, you know, because it's very easy. You know, you walk in here, it's got a lovely atmosphere. It's not, you would never walk in confused or intimidated by lots of pipes and large machines and noise. There's a small 200 litre system, and there's a fermentation room. So you're obviously making the beer repeatedly and working hard. So can you put into words what that's like?
Don't be under any illusion. I think people have a very glamorous impression of the brewing industry because of the end product and the nature of the end product. Yeah. I think what you have to remember is that behind that is an awful lot of hard work and a lot of monotonous work. And you shouldn't be under any illusion that it's going to be, making beer is any way, you know, easy. There's a lot, as you know yourself, Jonathan, there's a lot to worry about, you know, in terms of, you know, not only have you got to keep up with regulations and everything else, but you've also got to you know, you've got the quality of the product. The quality of the product is what defines your brewery, you know, and if you let bad quality beer go out there, you can very easily destroy your reputation immediately.
So you spend, what, 2 days a week brewing?
I'd say generally at the moment, because I think we'd be busier if it hadn't been obviously for current circumstances, but I will be at the moment 2-3 days maybe brewing, and then everything outside of that will be the rest of the work. So you're talking about the marketing, sales, distribution.
There's a reason I chose to chat to you beside these pumps is because one of the first events that you did in Derry, you rocked up at with
Cask.
A Cask pump and served Cask beer, and it went down exceptionally well. And with you being from Lancashire, you can't say that when he's from Huddersfield, but with you, you know, with you coming from there and your roots being in mainland UK, obviously the Cask beer scene is huge, and it's probably said that Cask beer isn't managed correctly here, and that's why.
No, I think that's the problem. You haven't got the infrastructure in bars and so forth to manage, and people don't know what it is. It's an interesting point you make there, Jonathan, because I was listening to a thing on the radio one time, and it was the guy, the chief of CAMRA. For those who don't know what CAMRA is, a campaign for real ale, who've kept what we call real ale alive all these years. And there was a time in the 70s when it was seriously under threat. And the problem was that a lot of experienced cellarmen and pub owners were lost in the Second World War, so that all the breweries were producing cask up to that point and were continuing to produce cask after post-war, but there was nobody left, or not very many people who could manage it, and that's key. And therefore breweries were sick of, you know, people mismanaging the beer. People wouldn't drink in the pub would lose business. At that time the pubs were owned by the breweries, the breweries lost out, so the breweries made a decision along the lines of let's go to keg because it's safer, you know, and they can't mess it up in the pub. So that there was a shift towards keg, and if it hadn't been for CAMRA, you would have lost that heritage there, definitely. CAMRA turned it around and said, look, we've got, don't go to, I think it was for those who know, it was Fuller's Brewery in London, for those who are familiar with that. And the chairman of Fuller's was at a board meeting, and he was making the decision as whether they should shift to keg, just like Watney's and Young's and all those other breweries had over there, the London breweries. And he said, look, you've got so-and-so on the phone from CAMRA. Took the call, he said, look, hold your horses, don't make the decision, don't pull the pin on Cask. We have people queuing around the block at festivals to drink Cask, good Cask beer. It is definitely something that should not be lost. And so don't do it. And they held off that decision. Fuller's held. And the chairman of Fuller said, right, he was a friend of your man anyway. He said, right, well, we'll not go with that yet. We'll give it another chance. And fair play, they pulled it round. And now, if you go in any pub in England, if it's which most pubs are, the decent pubs, you will have at least 6 of these probably. You know, and you probably, for those who drink the Crown in Belfast, you'll have seen this anyway.
Look, don't get me wrong, there's a very small amount of bars in Northern Ireland and even in Ireland that would serve Cask beer, and there's some that do it well. The problem we have is that there's a complete lack of knowledge here.
It is because it's a different animal. I think landlords would obviously be very busy people. If you're running a pub, you've got a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to do.
Look, to get back to Cask, right? So you're passionate about Cask.
Yes, I love Cask beer. What I was brought up on.
Tell us about Cask.
So the fundamental difference between the two is that when you drink out of a keg, you've got a beer that's been made with love and passion, like all beer, and then force carbonated, and then put it into a keg, and it's sealed under pressure. You then pop it on behind your bar, connect it up, it goes through a chiller, comes out your tap, a nice pint of effervescent
bright beer.
Right? Cask is what we call a live product. It's not pasteurised. It's taken straight from the fermenter with some of the yeast that's used in the fermentation process, put into a cask, which, if I could just, we have actually got some here. Right, this is actually into a cask, which is one of these bad boys here. And the fundamental difference is, for those of you who sit there for hours on end studying kegs and casks that have been sat outside pubs all the time waiting to be collected, this is a cask. And the main difference is, a keg is obviously sealed. It has for those who've seen it, there's a thing on the top.
Well, a spear.
Yeah,
spear runs down through it, and then there's
you connect it up. CO2 goes in. The CO2 pressure pushes the beer up the line and out through the chiller and out your tap and into your glass. Right, with a cask, we'd fill it through the hole in the top here. It would normally sit like this. What happens is that's all sealed up, and then what will happen there is, because some of the yeast has gone in with the beer, the yeast will have, and you add a little bit of priming sugar, you will get a secondary fermentation in the cask, and that CO2 that's produced from that, because CO2 is a byproduct of fermentation, is trapped in the cask and dissolves back into the beer, same as bottle conditioned beers. Okay, so it's not forced carbonated or artificially carbonated. It's the yeast in the beer creates a secondary fermentation, creates the CO2 and carbonates the beer naturally at a lower level as well. So it wouldn't be as fizzy as tap beer. You would then tap and let off excess CO2 by using a bamboo spline. Yeah. And then you would push your tap through the keystone, which will allow the beer to exit. You then connect it up to one of these bad boys. It's called known as a beer engine or a hand pump. And then basically, you will pull it through vacuum. So it would sit in a cool cellar, because cask beer, again, which puts some people off, is served at a slightly higher temperature. You don't run it through a chiller. The emphasis being that cask beers are brewed for the flavour to come through at a slightly higher temperature. As you know yourself, if you chill beer or chill anything, it loses its flavour. Yeah. And that's why if you try and drink Coors Light warm, it is impossible nearly, right? So, and that's why they recommend that you chill it to whatever ridiculous temperature. So cask beer is meant to be drunk a little bit warmer. Any beer people would say to you, a bit like red wine, if you're going to drink red ales and stouts and ambers, you should let them warm up a wee bit, because you get more of the caramel flavours and so forth come through. Yeah. Whereas generally you drink lagers are generally chilled, and if you try and drink lager warm, as we know, we've all had warm cans of lager when you've been at a picnic or whatever, it's hard going, isn't it? It's not easy, is it? Yeah. Right? Unless you're already steaming. So cask beer meant to be 8 to 10, I would say. For me, I like it a little bit on the cooler side, but some pubs would say 10 to 12 degrees. Yeah. Lets the flavour of the beer come through.
To wrap it up, thanks so much.
No worries, it's a pleasure.
Thanks
for coming down.
The visit concluded at Ruff Brothers today. You can see that it's possible to live the brewery dream, fulfill your passions, get involved in the brewing industry. So if you're interested in starting your own brewery and you're looking at a system of this size, come and talk to us. We can provide the help at every stage to get you to where you want to be. This is a working example of how this size of brewery works, and it's critically important that we explain to you that you understand, if you're brewing at this scale, that it is hard work. It is something that you have to be passionate about and dedicated to make a success, and we believe that this is a great working example of how that can come true. So if you want to get hold of some of Andy's beers, there's a lot of the collaborative brews that he does with the local restaurants in Derry here. I'm going to pop in the notes below a link to his social media channel, so you can follow him yourself and check out where it's at. It's very niche, this beer, and it's sold in the Derry area currently, but I'm sure that once Andy gets production flying that little bit more, he'll start to push further afield, so keep an eye out for his beer. Thanks so much for watching today, guys. Really appreciate it. Until next time, happy brewing.